Hey guys, Bogi here. I am a master mechanic, auto repair shop owner, and you might know me as one of the hosts of the TV show All Girls Garage. Today I'm hanging out in my shop working on this 2016 Denali HD 3500. We're going to be replacing a leaking rear axle seal. So we're going to be showing you some tips and tricks on how to make this job relatively easy. And of course, since this is such a large truck, I'm feeling quite short today, but you're going to get some bonus tips and tricks on how to tackle something on such a large vehicle when you're wee little like me. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're working on something of this size is that these wheels and tires are probably a good 130 to 150 pounds. So not something you want to lift high up in the air to take the wheel off. Even if you do have guns, you're going to hurt your back. So keep it as close to the ground as you can, get the wheel out of the way, and then we can raise it up to a good working height. Whew, this thing is as big as I am. So now that we've got the wheel off and it's up at a nice working height, we're ready to start with taking the caliper off and, of course, the brake disc as well. Now, good idea is to have some sort of bungee cord or strap or mechanics wire, something to hold this caliper up and safe so we don't damage our brake hose. We'll just put this out of the way. And because these are such large calipers, rather than removing the caliper and the bracket as one piece, it's going to be a little too heavy that way, I'm going to take the caliper off separately. And that will also make reassembly a little easier. All right, there we go. That works. Now with our caliper and our bracket out of the way, the rotor should come right off, but the parking brake does have an internal drum and shoes on the inside, so sometimes that'll fight us. We'll cross our fingers we get lucky. Beautiful. Ooh, those are heavy rotors. All right, now our next step is to remove the axle, and we do that by removing all of these bolts because this piece here is actually part of our axle. It's a good idea to have a rag handy because as we pull the axle out, there's of course axle fluid. We might make a little bit of a mess, so we'll keep that nearby. All right, there we go. This is where that rag comes in handy. Having a bucket underneath to catch it all is always a good idea. And this should slide right out. Now, generally say be careful when you're pulling this out to not damage the seal, but we're replacing the seal, so you don't have to be careful. All right. So now that we've got this all cleaned up, there's normally a whole lot of grease in there, as you saw, but I've cleaned up so you can see what's going on. And there's basically this protective cap on here, which is going to keep the nut that's behind it from backing out. That nut holds on this entire hub assembly. So once we get this cover off, we'll take the nut off, we'll take our whole unit off, we'll do the rest of the repair on a workbench. Now in order to take this off, it pulls forward, but it'll fight you a little bit. Using a little 90-degree hook tool is kind of helpful, and just kind of work it out. Kind of like that. So you can see that tab there is what's keeping it from turning, and that's keeping our axle nut from backing out. Now, once the cage is off, you can see there's also a little key in there, and magnet will help us get that out of there. Definitely want to put that in a safe spot. And then you can see that this doesn't look like a traditional nut, so we're going to use a specialty socket, and this is going to allow us to get that out of there. And you do want to use the correct tool for this. You don't want to go at it with a chisel or anything silly like that. Use the right socket. So there we go. And you're going to find something like this on pretty much all full floating style rear axles. Now that this is out of the way, our hub should come off. Like that. We won. We've got our hub out, and you can see that this is our axle seal that has been leaking. That's the culprit, And that's what we're going to be replacing today with, of course, a SKF original replacement. This is a factory fit. It's going to fit just like the original one did and protect this from leaking for a long time in the future. We're going to want to make sure that we're using all of the proper tools when we're doing this. Sometimes people like to cheat and use the not proper tools, but there's a lot to be said for using the proper equipment and investing in a seal removal tool as well as a seal installation tool rather than just using a piece of 2x4 and a hammer and hoping that you've got it on there straight. So we're going to pull the seal off using our axle seal removal tool. All right, looks like it's coming. There we go. All right, old seal, good riddance. New seal is going to slide right in there. We do want to grease the outside of it first, so we're just going to use some of the old oil that was in there. Just needs to be a little bit lubed up. Nothing crazy. And of course, if you were replacing the wheel bearing, this is clearly the time to do it. Nice, easy access. Now, traditionally, what people will like to do out in the field is they take their new seal, they seat it down on here, and they go, oh, that looks pretty straight, and maybe they're going to take their hammer straight to it, or they put a 2x4 on it and hammer on the 2x4. Now, while that works, that greatly increases your chances of damaging the seal or getting it set in there kind of cockeyed, and that's not a great scenario. So that's where our seal installation tool comes in handy. It centers it up for us, makes sure that we are going in straight and smooth and there are no issues and no possible comebacks. I'm going to set that down, use our hammer, tap it in. It's as easy as that. Keep going until it bottoms out, and there you go. Voila, brand new axle seal. Now, before we install this back on the vehicle, we are going to want to put some oil around this side of the seal as well. And not a bad idea to put some gear oil in this assembly as well. Just kind of add it back in a little bit of what spilled out when we took this off of the car. So, I'm going to gently seat this back on there. I think we've got it all the way in, and it is okay to use the nut to kind of bring it the rest of the way in if you need to. What we're going to do is put this nut back on. We're going to use our socket to tighten it down, and then we're going to torque it to 52 foot-pounds while turning this to make sure that it's not binding, and then we're going to back it off a quarter of a turn. All right, there we go. Still able to spin freely. And now we want to back it off that quarter of a turn. All right. We'll get it to where it's going to line up with a keyway. Slide that back in. Let go. Thank you. Now this is that cage that we took off. So we want the locking tab to sit in our groove right there. And this is just going to push on. We take a little bit of force. There we go. Next up is putting our axle back in. Try to get it centered. Get our splines lined up. All right, there we go. Perfect. So you'll notice that there was no gasket in here whatsoever, so we're putting it back on the same way. Now the bolts did have Loctite on them, so we're gonna go ahead and refresh that, make sure those are nice and tight and they don't back themselves off over time. But I'm gonna take a few moments to clean everything up with brake clean, all of that oil from the leaky axle seal, as well as making sure I didn't get any grease on these emergency brake parking shoes. We don't want grease on there to cause that to not work properly. But everything else from here on in is pretty much the reverse of what we did to take it apart. Nothing real special there. We'll bolt this down, make sure it's torqued to spec, put our brakes back together, wheel back on, and we're good to go. Hopefully you learned a couple of tips and tricks on replacing a leaking axle seal on this 2016 Denali HD 3500 ginormous truck. We've got a brand new axle seal on here, and that's going to be a pretty similar process to any full floating hub setup that you might encounter. We, of course, made our replacement and our repair with an SKF premium axle seal because I don't want to see this again. I don't want it to come back with a leak just after I did the work. So when I'm doing a job like this involved, I want to make sure I'm using the best quality part possible. And that's SKF, a name that I know that I can trust. So that's it. I'm going to get this put back together. Hope you guys learned some stuff. Appreciate you joining me. We'll see you next time.